Welcome to the 10-Minute Tuesday show. Tonight is Purim. Exciting times. Always a fun festival. A lot of noise, a lot of just gladness, joy. It's just a benevolent holiday to where everyone dresses up in costumes and just has a really great occasion. Good times had by all, because it commemorates one specific event in the Persian kingdom that happened to change the course of history. If you go back, the kingdoms were split, the north and the south. You had Solomon's sons, they're split, as prophesied in 1 Kings. And the southern tribe of Judah, northern tribe of Israel, they split. They didn't get along. And over time, Israel just dissipated. And Judah was all that was left of the nation. The 12 tribes of Israel was Judah, Benjamin, and some Levites. So they incorporated, they were the Jews. The southern tribes, they were the tribe of Judah, even though they were comprised of a couple other tribes of the 12. They're namely Jews. So the Jews stopped. If you read the book of Malachi, it's funny because Malachi was a contemporary of Esther. Even though it's the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi was writing all of this in the same time Esther was with the king's court and became queen. And so the Jews prior to this had been offering faulty sacrifices, had been just terrible at keeping the covenant that they were mandated to withhold and to uphold. And so they got swooped out of Jerusalem, pulled out of Jerusalem and dumped in Iran in captivity. That's where this story takes place, is modern day Iran. And so the king was having a banquet, and his wife would not perform some requests. He said, "Hey, could you do this? Could you do this for me?" And she just put up a fit and said, "I'm not doing this." Just kind of brashly. And the king goes, "This is not how you ought to operate in this kingdom, because it sends a bad signal to all the other ladies to get out of line." And again, you read the story, and so she is fired, and the king makes this big call to every single woman in the region to, "We've got an audition for queen. The part is open, the position's open." So they go through this ceremony, and Esther, Hadassah was her Jewish name. Mordecai told her to keep that on the low. And so Esther becomes queen. And along in this story comes a man named Haman, which in the Purim festivals, they make a bunch of noise to try to blot his name out of the services. So anytime you hear the word Haman, if I say the word Haman, just go, make some noise, make some racket. Blot his name out. It's tradition. You read the story. The book of Esther is very, very simple, very easy to read. So I challenge you to read it. You'll get a lot out of it, especially after this. You'll see where it all ties into. But Haman was kind of, if you look at his history, his lineage, he was not supposed to be in the picture, but Saul screwed up. King Saul, he was supposed to kill all the Amalekites. But he goes, "I'm not going to kill the Amalekites." Even though God commanded him to kill the Amalekites, he's like, "I'm not going to kill the Amalekites." Well, look what surfaces. Haman, generations later, Haman destroying the Jews, has an absolute rage fit because Mordecai will not bow to him. He finds out Mordecai, which is Esther's uncle, is a Jew. He's part of the southern kingdom of Israel. And all of a sudden he despises all Jews because he despises Mordecai. And in this, Haman crafts a plan to eradicate all of the Jews in the region, from Ethiopia to India. That was the Persian Empire's reign of influence. So throughout that whole thing, there was an edict that went out that said, if you're a Jew, sorry. And this was distraught. I mean, Mordecai was taken back by all of this. And so he just rips his clothes and starts praying. But he goes to Esther, and Esther's got this kind of, I won't say cockiness, but she's like, I don't think anything's going to happen. I can use my influence. But if we read in the story itself, Mordecai says, do not imagine that you, of all Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained this royal position for such a crisis. And some of the other translations, for such a time as this. How do you not know that you have attained position for such a time as this? The word God is not mentioned at all in the book of Esther. Yet you see God's workings in and around all of this, that his salvation will come for the Jews because Mordecai knows the promise. You have to go back to the Torah and to the prophets and to the writings of, he made a promise to David that there would always be a king on the throne of Judah. Always. And Mordecai knew this promise and was wanting to see that promise fulfilled and continue to be fulfilled. So he knew that God spoke. So Mordecai knew what God had spoken. And in this, they prayed and got together. And reading the scriptures, you'll find that Haman was out to a banquet. And Esther found out the plots. And then she turns him over to the king. And the king finds out of all of this thing. And Esther's people, the Jews, and has Haman and his whole family executed, and in the same gallows that he had built to execute all the Jews. So this is a story of redemption, not being in the right place at the right time, but just being in the place and let God provide the resources and the outcome of your story. Much like Esther's, much like Hadassah's story, there's no mention of God, but it doesn't mean that God is not working within your story, within my story, within our stories. Because in the Persian Empire, there was no room for Jehovah. That was not a name. They had Marduk. They had all these other gods that they worshipped, but Jehovah was not there. He was a foreign god to them. So you see in the book of Esther, God's name, Hashem, the name, is not mentioned. It's silent. Culture had no place for Jehovah. But even in that muteness, Jehovah still worked. Even in the silence, where it doesn't even seem like he's remotely there, and the pressure and the crushing of what was about to come about for the Jews with the edict of Haman, Jehovah was still working his promises, seeing to it that he was going to fulfill what he has spoken. And it says in Psalms 126, verse 5 through 6. What was sown in tears will now be reaped in joy. The same thing when Haman gave that edict. Tears were flowing on Mordecai, but he knew Jehovah. And so in that prayer and in that groanings, joy came about because hope and salvation was able to come through the Jews. But here's the great part. You know, we have in the Bible, Nehemiah, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job. You know, those are the chronology on those things are totally wrong. It should be Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah. Because if you look at the salvation of the Jews, because Esther made a stand for her people, she made a stand for her platform, for her God. She made a stand. Look what happened. The prophet Ezra. Look what happened. Prophet Nehemiah. What happened in Nehemiah? Jerusalem is restored. Walls are rebuilt. 25 years later, after Esther made that remarkable stand as queen, that I stand for my people. I stand for the people of Jehovah. I stand for everything that Jehovah promises. Then the prophet Ezra. Remember, the word of God was mum. It was not mentioned in the book of Esther. But Ezra comes up and restores the word. And he stands before the people. He gets up on that platform to read, as it says in Nehemiah 8. And he stands up on that platform to read the word, to the name of Jehovah. And the people stand up with him in honor. 25 years later, the muteness. And then the fulfillment of prophecy, the restoration of the name of Jehovah. So this is the story of Esther. More or less captured is the premise of reconciliation, joy, hope, and promise. But also the fulfillment through a stand. Esther made that stand. You and I need to make that stand for what we believe. And let Jehovah pour the water and let it grow. You know, Paul said, I plant the seed, Apollos waters. God brings the increase. That is all we are to do, is to make a stand. Plant the seeds. Other people will water those seeds. Mordecai planted the seed in Esther. Esther planted the seed in the whole nation. Ezra watered. Nehemiah was able to keep tilling the soil, and God brought the increase. You see that time and time again with the ancients. The seeds are planted, the water, and Jehovah brings the increase. That is the story of Esther. Not necessarily a salvation, but a propagation, a flowering, a bursting of a nation, a promise in development, and a promise in bloom. You see it in Esther, Ezra, and Nehemiah. That foundation promise that said, I will not forsake you. I will not leave you. I will rain on you and watch you bloom. That is the beauty of Esther. That is the beauty of the story of Hadassah. That she took a stand. She planted her feet and made a stand. Mordecai planted his feet and made a stand when it cost him almost his life. When it cost him, the inaction would have cost him his life. So why not act? Because you knew the consequences if you did not act. Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about the consequence of inaction. When Hitler was taking over Nazi Germany and exterminating Jews, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pastor at that time, and he was silent for some time. And then all of a sudden, he realized in his silence, if he did not make that stand, his voice would not be heard. And in that stand, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, one of the greatest theologians to come out of Germany, made a stand against Hitler. He was murdered. But that stand resonates even today. And same way with Hadassah. It resonates, that story, making a stand for what you believe, making a stand for the Purim, the casting of lots, which is funny. It's like claromancy. That's all Purim means, is to cast lots. Because Haman cast lots on what day he was going to eradicate the Jews. He cast lots on the 16th of Adar, which is by chance today. It started last night and it ends tonight at sundown. But guess what? Even in that claromancy, and that's where we get the word sort things out. It's a Roman word for Roman sorts. It's funny how we get these words that all of a sudden start meaning these weird things like claromancy, divination. But in these casting of lots, Haman thought he was in control of the destiny of the Jews. The 16th of Adar. That is going to be the day we're going to get rid of our problems. But Jehovah recognized Esther made a stand, heard somebody calling deep within, and he provided the way out. Like I always say, not all things are going to work out where you're able to hold your head high. You see in Romans, Paul was beat many times, shipwrecked, but he still held his head high for a stand. Many were martyred. Many suffered severe torture. But for the name of Jehovah, they were able to take that stand. And blessed are you when you're persecuted. Jesus says this. Yeshua goes, blessed are you who are persecuted when others mock you for my name's sake. Treasure is yours. We don't live for this earth, but in this earth we choose to make a stand. We choose to bloom. We choose to say the name of Yahovah in a world that tries to keep us mute. So, in the story of Esther, realize one thing. Make your stand. Do not be mute. For Zion's sake, we will not be silent. Nations will see your righteousness. No longer they will call you barren, but Jehovah will rejoice over you. And that's what he does. He rejoices over you. With singing, with gladness, with joy. That's what this Purim festival is all about. The excitement of who Jehovah is and his promises being fulfilled in our story, being fulfilled in the story of Hadassah, and Ezra, and Nehemiah, and you and in me. So that's the fun part of Purim, the excitement that Jehovah's story is working in us, with us, and through us.